being Italian American is, it's like being in my big fat Greek wedding, which the two cultures are very similar. You know, my grandmother, you walk in and she says, "Oh, you hungry?" And you say, "No, I just had a big lunch, Grandma." She says, "Okay, I'll make you something. Here, munch on this." So, you know, but with that comes all of the Roman Catholic traditions and everything like that. My grandmother on my mom's side is politically closed-minded, I guess is a nice way to put it. She doesn't do well wrapping her head around new ideas, and she is of the mindset that, you know, you find a nice girl, you settle down, you have 20 kids, and then that's what your life is about. And I am very much with a lot of that. You know, I'm all about settling down and having kids, not 20, because that's a little much. But, you know, family is very important to me and everything. Religion is not as important to me, but faith is. There's a fine line. And so I have not come out to my extended family yet. My immediate family, I am, but it's actually going to be interesting because my sister's wedding is coming up in 2 months, and bringing my boyfriend to the wedding. So more on that later.
I'm definitely, I don't know enough about what the official designations are, but I was definitely very much middle class, maybe upper middle class when I started school. And so since then, a lot of events have happened, you know, job loss, divorce, and such, to kind of definitely take the level down there, shifting downward in the class system, because money really does make the world go round. And if you experience that in a different way, I think, then it's quantified, you know, not in the case of, you know, experiencing being a woman and the privilege that's associated then with, you know, the fact that there are men out there who have the privilege that you don't. I mean, sometimes that can be quantified, like in the wage gap, but dropping in the class level definitely really made that concept of privilege very real for me, and so it kind of made me think about it in terms of my other identities as well, because I have white privilege, you know, which is the racial element of it, but in the other kind of big four elements, I'm technically on the disadvantaged side.
Caught up in what to say, I said you do.
I guess I said before that I sort of consider myself Jewish. My family doesn't belong to a temple anymore. We did for almost all of my youth. I think we quit probably 3 years ago when I stopped going to. One of the big factors was me stopping going to religious school, and I hadn't even, you know, fully accepted myself as gay at that point. But we were talking about with the rabbi, just like his beliefs and the temple's beliefs on things, and I never really thought about it, but Judaism does not really groove with gay marriage, or you know, my temple being a Reformed temple was fine with the idea of homosexuality, but hearing my rabbi say the words like, "I would never marry two people of the same genders," that really took me away from my religion. And I didn't consider myself very religious, or like religious, you know, in more than name and going through the rituals every couple months. But I think since then, and since I've like accepted myself, I now realize that Judaism, you know, doesn't accept me for who I am. The temple, even, you know, an incredibly Reformed temple, didn't accept me for who I am, and, you know, if I ever wanted to get married, it would not be allowed within that temple. So it really just brought me to a very secular place in my life.
I'm not particularly involved with anything on campus. I was a lot more involved in the LGBT kind of movement and activist stuff in high school. I don't feel like that's really my lack of involvement, though, is not a byproduct of something else that is part of my other identity.
I don't know. I don't know really when my activism in the LGBTQ community really started. Pretty much started as soon as I came out. I've always been interested in social justice, so I've always really believed in advocating for people who, in various situations, don't have a voice. So it was an easy transition to apply that to LGBTQ activism, and especially in this case because I identify that way. I always felt a strong connection and affinity for the community, and so I always would get offended on their behalf or feel like I wanted to defend, or help in some way. But really, what spurred me to action was coming out, because then I had. Because I sought out the resources, because it became my problem, So I had to go through that process myself, and I needed to find people and places that would help me in that process. And in doing so, I also found opportunities for me to then give back, which is something that I really wanted to do, because, for instance, the Spectrum Center here was super, super helpful.
Well, I think obviously being Christian makes it hard to be part of the LGBT community, because you sort of start off reminding people of a group which has had systematic and still has systematic injustices against LGBT folks. When I talk about my priest or spiritual discernment, people immediately often go back to how they've been hurt and what that's done to them. So it's been hard to talk with people about that.
I guess that's another thing that that my identities afford me, is that the thing that is most detrimental to my future is my sexual orientation. So that is the thing I'm worrying about. That's the social identity that I'm probably, thinking most about, because there's the most to think about with. So I guess I'm lucky that I don't have, more social identities that I need to really fight for. So just me being upper class, I have the time to work for causes that I'm passionate about, rather than, working to pay for schooling.
To be honest, I'm not all that active. If somebody were to ask me about it, I do have very strong opinions about it, but I don't necessarily go out of my way to go to rallies or, make banners or march in a parade or anything like that. Mostly just because that's not the kind of person I am. I tend to speak through my own actions based on how I live my day-to-day life, rather than making one big stand or something like that. So, I'm much more likely to do a performance piece about it, or, write a play, or just, the way that I live my life is me taking a stand. So while I'm not showy about it, it doesn't interfere with me doing what I'm doing anyways, because I know what I believe and I stick to it very strongly.
Being LGBT has in some ways influenced my involvement in other places. The primary example that comes to mind is just in general being tokenized as the gay. Like in a Catholic church, there aren't going to be that many people that are openly gay. So sometimes I get a lot of attention for being gay. And a lot of stereotypes could apply to me, mostly jokingly, because a lot of these people know me pretty well, but even so, people interact with me in a really specific way because of knowing that I'm gay.
I'm also very passionate about women's rights. I'm in a campus group here called Yoni Kibat, which is primarily it's a monologue show about different issues that are related to women and taboo, and specifically in South Asian culture. So things like domestic violence, mental illness, LGBTQ identity, that kind of thing. And what ends up happening is you get this really interesting multicultural, representation through all these different monologues that people submit, representation across class as well.
Just run, little rabbit.
I would really like to see a more prevalent LGBT spiritual group here on campus. There are a couple, and St. Mary's Student Parish even has one, but they've all the ones that I've gone to have been very small, and they tend, this is kind of generalization, some of the ones I've gone to have really focused on let's challenge religion and let's fight religion, and I think there is a place for that because religion can definitely be oppressive, and that needs to be dealt with and challenged. But I also think that there is something to the idea of being spiritual and believing in God, or just engaging with what the meaning of life is. And I just don't find that there's an LGBT group on campus that really does that. And I guess I can get that outside of the LGBT community. But again, it goes back to I sometimes feel like the LGBT community is even hostile towards that way of thinking. So beyond not having one available to LGBT students, it goes as far as if you are involved with one, you almost become stigmatized in the community. So I think sometimes my spiritual needs aren't met by the LGBT community, especially specifically here in Ann Arbor.
Bad boy for breaking a heart, and I'm free.
One of the biggest things that I had a problem with early on, when I first came to Michigan, I was, pretty reluctant to come out to anybody, just because I hadn't quite figured it out yet. And early on, when I met a bunch of, primarily guys who were really into the movement and everything, there was a lot of pressure to be really vocal about it. I got yelled at because I wasn't going to rallies or parties or stuff like that, and there was this kind of pressure to, if you're not doing something about it that we can see, then you're not doing anything about it, which, like I said, is not generally how I personally operate. And I understand where they're coming from, and yes, it is my responsibility to do what I can for people like me, but that doesn't mean that you should have to give up all of your other identities. So I live relatively comfortably day to day because, I can walk into a grocery store and have a 2-second conversation with someone and they would never know what my sexuality was. Whereas some guys don't have that, well, you can call it luxury, you can call it curse, whatever you want to call it. But, I can go through my day-to-day life without wearing that identity on my sleeves. And I don't think it's right to force people to wave the rainbow flag if they don't want to. Some people just need to come into their own. And there are many ways of taking a stand. So I think it's better just to let people take the stand as they see fit.